Okay, welcome to the City of Asheville Budget Work Session. And I'm going to turn it over to the city manager to kick us off.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, everyone. This is literally the kickoff, our first work session with council regarding the next budget cycle. We are going to have 3 people who are going to really take the brunt of, and I say that affectionately, of the presentation. It'll be Taylor Floyd, Tony McDowell, and Jay Dundas. And unlike our normal kickoff for the budget sessions, we focus a lot on the operating budget. This time, we're going to focus a lot of our attention on the capital budget. Not that any one of them are more important than the other, but we have unfortunately not focused a lot of attention on the capital budget. So we want to do that this year in particular, considering the needs. So with that, I will turn it over to Taylor to start the presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. City Manager said, first time speaking with y'all about the fiscal year 2022-23 budget development. Excited to be here and share some information with you today. So we're going to start with just a brief overview of the plan for the next hour and a half. I'm going to give sort of an overview of the budget process and where we're at, what the plan is moving forward. Tony McDowell, our Chief Financial Officer, will be giving a financial update. Then I'll be back to talk a little bit about our capital improvement plan process. And then I'll turn it over to Capital Projects Director Jay Dundas, who will talk about some updates to capital projects and some council and community engagement around capital projects. So I want to start with our kind of key takeaway. What we hope you take away from this presentation is that we are working to more clearly connect the resources that we use with the services we deliver and the impact those services have on our community. This work builds through our previous budget processes, and this isn't going to finish with the budget adoption this year. This is something we're going to carry forward into future budgets. We're focused on trying to do that through communicating more clearly about how budget decisions align with community interests and goals, collaborating across departments to achieve goals, and showing how our resources, service delivery, and goals align. So I'm going to start with an overview actually of the FY22 budget process, which was kind of where we ended in July of last year, just as a refresher. Hopefully these next 3 slides look familiar to you all. We showed them to you several times during the budget process for FY22. Starting from our internal work, that process started with an acknowledgement of the crises that we found ourselves in at the time. We worked with departments to identify some of the challenges that we face, and we identified neighborhood level engagement and clearer decision-making framework as response strategies to address those challenges. Looking at the community engagement that we did during the FY22 process, we think the internal work that we did reflected what we heard in the community, which was primarily an interest in better understanding how the city budget impacts individuals and neighborhoods. We think the strategies that we identified internally helped to address some of the challenges, and we also, in the FY22 budget, included $150,000 in funding for a new neighborhood matching grant. We're completing work on the first round of allocations to neighborhood projects, and the second round of that will be planned for the spring. Then, of course, we're continuing to work on council priorities established through the Vision 2036 and priority strategies from 2019, in addition to the 4 priorities that you all determined at your April last year council retreat. Again, we think that those internal strategies help to address some of these priorities. A quick update on those priorities. $2.1 million was set aside at the end of FY21 for reparations. 911 consolidation with Buncombe County. One piece of the reimagining public safety work has been completed. We were able to implement recommendations of our class and compensation study thanks to council action with the FY22 budget. And as I think you all are well aware, the funding process to allocate the ARPA money is underway currently. As I said, we're continuing to work on the council priority strategies. I won't go through every single one of them, just call out a couple. Number 4, amending the UDO. We're doing that incrementally to try to implement the Living Asheville Comprehensive Plan. The urban centers rezoning that was recently approved is an example of that, as is the current open space amendment that planning staff are working on, which would remove regulatory barriers in the UDO to increase housing. Also want to call out number 5, our business inclusion program. The business inclusion policy has been adopted. And again, we will continue our work on these in the current year and moving forward as well. Also want to remind you all, in FY22 was a revaluation year, and we were able to adjust our initial recommendation of a 3-penny tax increase over revenue neutral down to 2 pennies at adoption using some transit-specific ARPA funding and fund balance appropriation. We also tried to limit the impact of that property tax increase on low-income homeowners by participating in a Buncombe County grant program. 453 applications from city property owners were approved by the county as part of that program. So to summarize, we're really trying to bring together all of these pieces, what we heard from you all, what we've heard from the community and from staff, and kind of bring those all together within the financial context to develop our budget. That's kind of where we left off at FY22. And we hope that that work built on previous budget cycles, what we've heard, and we hope that we can continue that work forward as we go into the FY23 development process. Any questions? Hearing none, I will share a little bit about how we're trying to carry this work forward in the FY23 process. So as I mentioned earlier, we're really working to identify the connections between our resources, the services we provide, and community impact. Doing this starts with clearly defining each one of those items. The resources side, we have a good handle on. That's essentially our budget. The services, all of the things that we do, we have some opportunities to communicate more clearly about. We tried to start some of that work with the Finance and HR Committee, sharing some detailed information earlier this year about sanitation and stormwater services. We've done a lot of work to identify priorities and goals, that impact that we're hoping to make on our community with the services that we provide. But we're hoping to do a better job of linking these 3 things together, really trying to kind of build out those dark lines in the middle of this slide. So we've started some of that work with our management team retreat on our internal process back in December, asking these 3 questions about our services. Where do we have shared responsibility? Which services most align with our stated goals? And which services should we really be looking at through the budget process? As we worked through that last question, a few things came up. On the left side, some internal service opportunities were identified, things that we can do to try internally to try to improve our service delivery, make sure that we're taking care of our employees, implementing technology enhancements where that will help us improve service, and just simple process improvements. Community safety, community engagement, and facilities maintenance and construction were identified as external services that we want to look at more closely through the budget process. And again, these services span multiple departments and are also key to helping us achieve our goals. So what we're looking to do with those services through the budget process is identify what resources we're putting towards those services, clearly define what level of service is needed to achieve our goals, and then look to see where we have opportunities to realign existing services or add new resources that will help us provide the level of service our community is expecting. And again, this is work that we're continuing on. It won't be finished in July with adoption. We're hoping to continue to work towards that beyond the FY23 budget. Then brief overview of the timeline for you all. We're here in February at our first council work session. The council retreat is scheduled for March. Then we have 2 more work sessions in April, as well as the adoption of changes to our fees and charges, followed by a proposed budget in May and a public hearing and budget adoption in June. All right, so that's the end of kind of the process, high-level overview. Any questions about any of that before I turn it over to Tony for a financial overview? Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. So if we can go to slide 14, where it talks about the fiscal year 23 budget process and the bubbles. I guess my curiosity around this, because I know, in our efforts, we're gonna have different ways of looking at it, and it's gonna maybe be viewed different ways by different folks. But if we sideline equity instead of centering equity, then I worry we aren't gonna get equitable outcomes. And I'm not saying this is an exact reflection of what we do every day, but we did talk about in the retreat having that shift in the culture, in the narrative, and I don't see it here. So maybe we can speak more to that. Maybe this is why we hear community calls for an outside equity audit. Maybe this could look like operationalizing our staff reports so we can get fiscal impact and equity impact and the sustainability impact. But I am worried that if this is what we're doing, it might not reflect what we're doing, and I'm worried about that.
This may just be a shortcoming of this graphic, but I was lucky enough to meet one of the final new members of our Equity and Inclusion Office yesterday, an exciting new team put together by our talented Brenda Mills, and I'm assuming that the Equity and Inclusion Office will be linked into the budgeting process pretty thoroughly. Maybe the manager could speak to that.
Absolutely, they will be linked, and unfortunately, maybe having equity on the side is, you're probably right, Ms. Ronnie.
I mean, a graph,
But
in other words,
in terms of the graphic,
capturing, yeah.
But in terms of the guiding principle for our organization, it is a framework. It is all inclusive, and yes, it is the lens that we look and view all of these resources, services, and community impact.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I'll go ahead and say that with my mic on. So once again, if we had an opportunity to add equity impact and sustainability impact to our staff reports, that could be one way to operationalize seeing not just the upfront financial cost, but the lingering cost of when we do or don't make a decision outside of just the front end cost.
Yes, and that would be a change, even though internally, I think we go through that assessment. It would be a matter of changing the staff reports to incorporate that on a regular basis, such that the community also knows how we did that assessment. It's something that we definitely need to come back and review and assess, because we can have environmental, there's a list of things that we could add in terms of impact with every decision that's made. And we could work with council on which other ones, if you want to move in this direction, are the most important to you in terms of the staff assessment and analysis.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell. Yeah, and I would say that as it relates specifically to the budget process, it's certainly not meant to be on the side. It's something that I think is a critical component of that community impact, what we're trying to achieve in the community. And we're trying to make sure, again, we're integrating that more clearly. I think we certainly have more work that we can do to clearly link the resources, again, our budget itself to equity, the services we deliver, and how they can be delivered equitably.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor, City Council. Tony McDowell, Finance Director. I just want to spend a few slides giving you all kind of a brief update on our financial forecast and our financial condition in the current year. And I want to kind of pick up with the emphasis that Taylor talked about in terms of the strategy and the process really extending beyond just one fiscal year and really covering multiple years. And that's really how we think about the financial data as well. And the information and the results from last year and this year really impact the outlook and the money that we're going to have available for services next year. So I want to start by saying that, and just again emphasize I'm going to be brief today and give you all a real high-level overview of the numbers. We'll be back to you all in future work sessions to give you all much more of a deep dive into the financial outlook for next fiscal year. So again, kind of starting with last year and then moving our way forward, our auditors presented last fiscal year's results to you all back in January. And just to kind of hit some of the high level takeaways from that presentation, our general fund, we saw our property and sales taxes exceed budget. And as a result of that, we saw our fund balance slightly ahead of where our policy target of 15% is. In other funds, we got some additional funding, some grant funding through the ARPA program to help out with our deficit in the parking fund. And we also got funding through the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant in Harrah's Cherokee Center to help out with the revenue loss there from the lack of events during fiscal year 21. And even though it's not on this slide, I should also point out too that the CARES Act funding and the ARPA funding helped with the overall general fund result as well, because we were able to take dollars from those programs and dedicate them to our pandemic response, dollars that we probably would have had to spend through the general fund had we not gotten ARPA and CARES Act money to help out with that. So looking at the current fiscal year, we're continuing to see revenues in the general fund perform very well. In particular, our sales taxes. We've gotten about 4 months worth of sales tax data so far, and we're running about 20% ahead of where we were last year at this point. So sales taxes are doing really well. We got our property tax update from Buncombe County last month. Property taxes are also coming in on budget. So overall revenues in the general fund this year are doing either performing at or above budget so far. On the expense side in the general fund, expenses are on target for where we would expect them to be at this point in the fiscal year. So right now, when you combine the revenues and expenses and you kind of take a snapshot of where we're at and where we're headed with fund balance, right now we're projecting that we'll end the year in the general fund with fund balance of about $22.3 million, which will be right around that 15% policy target that we have. The only area of concern that we have currently in the operating budget this year is really in the parking fund. And revenues there do continue to underperform, partly pandemic related, but also partly related to the garage equipment. And so revenues there are lagging. And the reason we raised that as an issue with you all is that, as you all probably know, the parking fund subsidizes the transit fund. But under general statutes, it can only subsidize the transit fund once the parking revenues have covered parking operating expenses. So if we end up in a situation at the end of this year where parking revenues have not covered parking costs, we may be talking to you all about other options for the parking revenue going into the transit fund. And we're monitoring this. We're working with folks in the staff in the transit department to keep an eye on this over the next couple months and identifying potential options for that funding source if we have to go down that route. So now looking ahead to next year, and like I said, we'll be back with much more detailed information in upcoming work sessions with you all on the numbers. But right now we are anticipating that, again, we will have some revenue growth next year, particularly in the general fund, and we think that it will be enough to continue existing service delivery. The things we're looking at closely are really on the expense side right now. I think as you all probably know, inflation is running at a higher level than it's really been in a generation, certainly since I've been working in the budget office. And so we're focusing on that and how it's impacting not only our salaries, not only our materials and those kind of costs, but also our salaries as well. And also we've already heard from the state of North Carolina that they intend to continue the retirement cost increases that they've been passing along to local governments over the last few years. And so we'll have to build that into the budget as well. And this, just a few other things to remind you all of. We will have the full cost of the new fire station coming online next year. And then we've already been talking to the Finance and Human Resources Committee about some of the needs in water and sanitation and stormwater, and specifically the fee increases that we may be seeking to meet some of those service needs. So just to kind of give you all a summary of where we're at, we are in a strong financial position. Again, we've had revenues, the economy's been doing well, so our revenues in the general fund, like sales taxes and property taxes, have been performing well. We've gotten the additional grant funding through ARPA and through CARES that have certainly helped with our service delivery over the last couple of years. And we're working right now to continue to provide our existing level of service within the financial constraints that we have, because I don't want anyone to get the wrong idea. Even though we are doing really well financially at the moment, we definitely still have constraints on that side, and we're not able to meet all the needs that are out there. And then, like I said, we'll be coming back to you all shortly to talk about some potential fee increases for water, stormwater, and sanitation. So I think with that, that is all for me today. I get off easy, just 5 slides. It's mainly Taylor and Jade. So any questions for me?
I have a question about the parking fund. And I don't know if you'll know the answer to this, but so I did notice that our parking decks were offline for a good part of this last year, and there were times where you either couldn't get into a deck or everyone just got out for free, you know, the arm would be up, and I guess it was because the equipment wasn't ready to go. Is it all back in order now? I mean, are we 100%? No? Maybe.
City parking lot for sure isn't.
We are not. We are having technological issues with the new equipment and linking to Jessica. Don't have me.
I've been told it's basically a battle of the firewalls, whatever that means. So it's technological.
Yeah.
Mostly, we're working on it with the company and with our IT department. I think there's been progress made, but it's been a very bumpy situation.
So is that true at every city deck, or?
It was initially, and then we were able to get, I believe, Biltmore up and running. I think as far as this weekend, I know that we had to raise all the gates again because of issues on all 4. So it kind of changes, and it's been very frustrating for everybody involved, and obviously results in a significant revenue loss.
Yeah, that's, I mean.
And working with the vendors to have the time and the resources to actually make the repairs.
Does the vendor not have any liability in this for providing equipment that we can't operate properly?
Well, I think that it was not wholly their responsibility, is my understanding. It was kind of a combination of our IT infrastructure and theirs. So I think it was a shared situation with working together to try to fix it. And that's ongoing.
So is there an idea of when that will be remedied?
I wish I could say yes, but I thought that it was a couple weeks ago, and then we had issues as late as this weekend. So we'll keep you guys posted. It's definitely not ideal.
Have we looked into having personnel there to receive monies? Is that cheaper than the losses we're sustaining?
We have about a 40% vacancy rate. No, 60% vacancy rate in parking right now. We have contractors occasionally, particularly during events. We have lost contract staff in security because the contractors can't provide their own staff. So staffing is overall a massive issue. We've tried to use temporary staffing agencies, but they are also unable to provide staff. So we have a pretty difficult situation, especially during events. And so, right now we're preparing for SoCon next weekend, and we're gonna need a lot of volunteers to help us in the garages that day. So it's been very challenging for a whole host of reasons.
And you all may recall on one of those slides in our internal management team budget retreat, technology is one of those things that we just have to work on.
Well, but this sounds like it
It's a
kind of
combination
transcends just a matter of allocating some money to it. It sounded like, well, do we know what the total losses are year-to-date in parking?
I might have to lean on Taylor. I think that we're currently about $800,000 short if you didn't include the full transit allocation,
What is that allocation, 1.5?
1.6.
1.6?
Well, I mean, what I'm asking is, how much revenue have we lost in parking funds that we would normally get if our parking lots were fully functioning? What's our loss year-to-date? Do we know that
It's
number?
probably about 800, because our meters are doing really well. The meters haven't had significant losses.
Well,
It's
right.
mostly the garages, and so I think 800,000 is the number I've heard recently for up to end of January.
So, I mean, I don't mean to like get my hairs on fire about this, but I mean, it does seem like it's been this situation that's been going on, and, people are posting pictures of the parking decks. We've got barricades at some entrances. We've got the arms up. I mean, it's very confusing all the way around in terms of using the parking deck, and then we're losing the revenues. I guess I'd like to hear that there's a little bit more of an assertive movement towards remedying the situation. I mean, this is sort of rhetorical, but like, do we need to get rid of this equipment and get some other equipment in there right now? Is there a way to do that, or is it a supply chain issue? And even if we wanted to pivot at this point, it would be months and months away. And you may not know the answer to this.
So, Jessica, so you don't have to take all of that. I think that we will provide you all with a update on where we are, the financials year-to-date, a specific and more definitive analysis of, and definite, what is the actual problem. So we will provide that to you all in short order, as well as, if we could have fixed it, we would have, Mayor. But we'll give you what's going to happen over the next, I guess, month or so to see what kind of progress we can make on it.
Yes, we can do that.
Thank you, Deborah. I have one kind of related question. In recent years, there had been talk of a potential dedicated local sales tax for transit. If I understand correctly, and I'm not sure, that would have to be on a ballot. I'm just wondering if there is any discussion of that potential for November? That would help with this transit funding? Is it being talked about? Is it an interest?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any. I'm not sure if city manager is or anyone else.
I don't know if there's a definitive type of effort or initiative underway currently, but it is one of the 13, I think, priorities for you all to come up with the diversified revenue, and part of that would be devoted to transit, and it may even be a separate one related to transit.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Turner, I can also say that was included as one of the items on this council's legislative agenda.
Right.
It was put up to our local delegation. It did not result in a bill being run. That is something that will require state action, whether that is a county-wide sales tax or a city-specific sales tax. But we have communicated that up to our local delegation, and certainly that's something we could look at again when the legislature is back in session for those types of bills.
So as it stands right now, it would have to be a county initiative?
Pardon?
It would have to be a county initiative, is that correct, as it stands right now?
The process that is currently outlined and utilized by other municipalities and counties has always been on the county level. And there is some technical rationale for that, the way that sales tax is collected. It makes a great deal easier for us to do that on a county level and for the state to manage it on a county level. That does not necessarily mean it is impossible, and those discussions have happened in the state legislature, but we would be the only one who does not do it on a county level if we proceeded and we're able to gain authority for a citywide level.
Well, I mean, and so to cut to the chase, there's statutory authority right now for counties to put on the ballot a referendum that's a countywide sales tax, specifically for transit, and it has to be for enhanced services in transit. It can't supplant the current services in transit. We have, in the past, through former Councilmember Julie Mayfield, talked with the legislature and the Department of Revenue about trying to get a bill that would allow a citywide sales tax for transit, and that has gone nowhere. And that's generally because tax bills, specifically regardless of what they concern, are not moving in the legislature. Just as a matter, I would say it's not really policy, it's just political. But Orange, Wake, Durham, Mech, they all have countywide transit taxes that have passed on a referendum. They have a different makeup in terms of their population. Most of the populations are in the city, or at least for Durham and Mech. I don't know, and actually even probably Orange, but
Do you know if they're 25 cents?
they vary. And again, the reason that Wake, Orange, and Durham did theirs is because they're partnering on light rail in those areas, and they had to come up with their match to try to advance light rail. And Charlotte's MEX is used for light rail as well, right? I mean, so we're definitely in a different boat. I don't think Guilford and Forsyth have done a transit tax that I'm aware of yet. So, I mean, it would probably be a big lift, given that only a third of the county's population lives in the city of Asheville, unless we were able to create a transit authority and make the case for broader services into the county, I think. And it would be great if we were able to do something like that, because obviously you get a significant amount of revenue if you're able to harness sales tax locally. Right now, most of our sales tax subsidizes the rest of the state, as most metro areas sales tax does. So, I mean, that's just how North Carolina is set up.
Thank you. I didn't mean to derail us, but I
No,
appreciate the
but
info.
I guess I would add that we are also looking at a kind of comprehensive countywide planning initiative around transit, and looking at governance, looking at potential funding sources, because I think that really helps when you have a consolidated plan, and that when you go for a referendum or whatever, or even requesting the opportunity from the state, if that were the case, you have a document that says, this is how we're specifically going to use that revenue. So I think that helps from the public's perspective of knowing what the tax would be used for.
For the public benefit, I just wanted to add for anyone who's watching, when we're talking about a sales tax revenue dedicated for transit, that would be in addition to what we already do. So if we add a sales tax that's dedicated for transit, it won't cover what we're already seeing in this parking fund loss. It would be if we expand into the county. It would be if we expand our evening service hours, for example, to go to midnight. It would be to expand to add a downtown circulator. But additionally, if we're going to convince our neighbors that we should pitch in more, then I think that we might need to talk about the link to affordable housing. Every study we're looking at shows that if the farther you move out to reduce your cost for housing, you pay a significant part of that, up to 70% back in your transportation costs, parking, maintaining a car, having a car. Gas prices are up. So I'm also interested in the sales tax revenue for transit, because I want our visitors to participate in the solution with us. So we are going to need to coordinate with the county. It is going to have to be on a ballot, but I think we're going to have to explain to our neighbors why we just raised property taxes and then are considering a sales tax revenue.
But that, it's not a consideration in the short term. I think we're working through that process. Just wanted to clarify that.
All right, I'm back. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our capital improvement plan, and then turn it over to Jade to discuss some more specific project information. So I want to start at a really high level. What is capital? Why do we budget it separately? And how do we fund it? Capital assets are essentially big, expensive things that last a long time. Buildings, land, pipes, roads, bridges, stuff like that. Why do we budget it separately? It has a defined beginning and end. It's a project, not an ongoing service. It usually takes more than one fiscal year to complete, so we budget those in multi-year funds so that those last through the completion of the project. And then due to the scale of that investment, they're mostly funded with debt. And that debt is typically bonds, be that general obligation bonds, limited obligation bonds, in the case of enterprise funds, revenue bonds. We do use some pay-as-you-go funding in our capital program, or cash, in other words, tax revenue from the current year. And we do also get quite a bit of intergovernmental grants from federal, state, and other sources. So how do capital projects impact service delivery? I think sometimes we can lose this a little bit when we talk about capital and operating separately, but capital is a really critical component of our service delivery. In some instances, like roads or sidewalks, it is basically the actual service itself. In other instances, it's what allows us to provide service, be that pipes for water or stormwater to run through, or buildings for employees to work in. And it's also critical to helping us achieve our goals like sustainability, providing access to recreation, transportation, and other things. So I want to walk through kind of the financial life of a capital project. But first, just a point of clarification. Again, we talk about this separate from operating, but the projects are essentially still funded by general revenues, just like the operating budget is. So the project, again, financially speaking, starts out once you all adopt a budget for it. During the construction of a project, we actually pay invoices with cash on hand and then reimburse ourselves with short-term loans. We pay off those short-term loans on a cycle, usually about every 2 years, with that long-term debt, those bonds. And then ultimately we pay the principal and interest of that debt with, again, general revenues. So that's kind of how each budget process or each capital project budget works. One note, this holds true for our general obligation bonds. And we've talked a little bit about that 7-year deadline, which is November 2023. That deadline is actually for that debt issuance piece. That's what that's about, is that's the deadline for having that debt issued. So just to kind of wrap up on how the process works, we start off by identifying our capacity. What do we have the ability to fund? Departments identify projects and estimate costs. We prioritize those projects based on how they align with our goals and how they help us to continue to deliver our services. Then staff recommends a capital improvement plan, including hopefully council adoption of the budget for the first year projects in the plan. Then as projects come to life, we start spending, we start issuing debt. That feeds back into that debt capacity, and we kind of start the cycle over again. Any questions about that? I'm going to hand it over to Jade.
Good afternoon, Mayor and members of council. Jade Dundas, Capital Projects Director. Decided we'd present a little bit of a halftime show here, maybe. This is the Pack Square fountain. This is actually splash fill out in front of City Hall. It was finished last summer, end of summer and fall, and so when it goes back into operation this year, this is what will be seen in the after hours. We were able to put LED lights in this and really improve the show. Also, it's an amazing asset for us. Just a little bit of a story. I was in the water office when I first got to Asheville, and the look of that is the county building. The scenery for that is the county building. But when Splashville came to life in the spring, I heard the children out there just enjoying themselves, and so that every day, that for me in that summer was that was my view. Closed my eyes and I could see those kids out there having a great time. So really wanted to take some time to kind of update you on the successes that we've had regarding some of the projects that we've undertaken over the last few years. As you can see, the symbol here, the blue, is our bond transportation indicator, our symbol. We have had a lot of success and been able to achieve a lot through the last 5 years. 5 years of the bond. Not all these projects, these are transportation projects, all of them which are GEO bond funded. We've had good success with our parks, rollout of parks projects, Jake Rusher Park, Richmond Hill Restroom, sports courts across the city that have made some huge improvements. You can see on the bottom right there is a picture of Shiloh Center and the improvements that have been made to that facility. We, as staff and as council, we should all be really proud of those, because those are improvements that are made more or less incrementally, not all bond, not all operating, but really using the various funding sources that we've had to really improve the facility. This picture is taken from the parking lot, but even behind the parking lot, we've got operating funds that went into, capital repair funds that went into the repair of the roof, which actually prepared it for having solar equipment on top of it. So it is one of our 5 facilities now that have solar array on top. Pack Square Fountains also, as I'd mentioned. Affordable housing is again, all of the bond expenditures that have happened since 2016 are listed here. Housing Trust Fund, 50 Ashland Avenue, and then just really working to be diligent about spending those funds and making sure that they're put to good use. But also really to kind of refocus on, it's not all about the bond. We do have a regular capital improvements process and projects, mainly our building projects that are represented here. Roof replacements, roofs are very expensive, but we do need to replace them about every 20 years on facilities. We are wrapping up, or we've recently wrapped up the first floor ADA accessible restroom in City Hall. So when we start getting people back into City Hall, that restroom will be right there on first floor and available for families, and is a completely ADA accessible, designed to be so. Another project in this building that we're very, very proud of is that we had a heating and air modernization in the arena itself, but also the areas or the windows around the building were single pane, energy inefficient. They leaked, and so we worked with the Harris Cherokee Center to put in double pane windows that are sealed up. They don't leak anymore. They're energy efficient, but also as an opportunity for this, you can see the differences in the exterior of the building. So a lot of this is improving facilities, making sure that we increase the longevity of the facilities, but it's also just making sure that we are keeping good condition on the outside and the inside of facilities as well. We improved Fire Station 4 to really provide firefighters in that station. It's a Skyline station, it's a shared use station. Before the project, every alarm, whether that was a Skyland alarm or a Asheville alarm, woke up the entire firehouse. This project that we did, it separated those, and now the firefighters can get quality rest when they're not being called upon. And then also Art Station, which was our first solar project, and then you see the other solar projects here as well. But we continue to go. There's a lot of projects in here. I'm not going to hit every single one of them. Sidewalk projects, we are in process of designing those. Certainly working with the communities to make sure that they're informed, and then also to be able to roll those projects out. These projects, there's some right-of-way, tight right-of-ways, and so we're working with property owners in acquisition, and then also just making sure that the scope is the right scope for those projects. On the bottom, you'll see the French. Actually, all 3 of these photos are French Broad River West Greenway. This one is not a bond, but it's underway and should be completed, connecting Haywood Road to essentially Carrier Park and the trail that goes out of Carrier Park. Road resurfacing is something that we do every year. It's a great maintenance project, as Taylor had mentioned earlier. And then Cox Avenue Complete Streets, that's someone that council is going to be seeing with regard to awarding the design contract here in just a month or two. Again, parks projects, Dr. Wesley Grant Center is under construction. Mountainside Memorial is certainly, we're trying to work out the details of what that project continues to be. Weaver Park Bridge and sports courts are underway and design is being done on those. One thing I really want to mention here and is highlighted is the comprehensive facility assessment. We are doing a facilities assessment that will go through all of our facilities and identify needs, whether that be roofs, windows, structural needs, and we are actively seeking respondents to the RFQ right now. And so we hope our target is to get that work done and be prepared to include those expenditures and that into our budget projections for the 2024 budget year. You can see a long list of things here. You see on the pictures from the top is Broadway Public Safety Station. That site's under construction. The Weaver Park Bridge is on the bottom right, and that is really what initiated that project. It's in need of repair. Actual location is going to change to be more ADA accessible with the completion. And then also the bottom left is a picture of what our modernized elevators will look like. There we are automating the elevators. The equipment was 100 years old and definitely was a pain to maintain. Is when you had an elevator break down, we weren't always sure we're going to be able to get it back up. We almost have to manufacture parts in order to put those elevators. So now we're replacing all the mechanical equipment, automating that, and these are what the cabs are going to look like, the dark green and the beautiful work at the top. So another couple of highlights here. Shiloh Gymnasium is, we did a study on whether or not, how to modernize the HVAC system at Shiloh. We are going back with energy efficient boilers, but we also, it was also recommended that we replace, or that we install air conditioning in the gym center. It's my understanding it was the only gym center in Asheville that did not have air conditioning. So that gymnasium, after this project was finished, will have air conditioning. And then also we're looking at Montford Center to ensure that we have the energy efficient. The boilers needed there to be replaced there, and we're working on trying to assess whether or not that we can electrify heating and air associated with that facility. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that water and stormwater are enterprise funds that have their own capital, but it's nonetheless, it's very important that all of those are integrated when we do our projects. So that's a real quick assessment of a portion of the projects. There actually are more, but I didn't run out of slide space. So I'm happy to answer any questions you might have on that.
This is Kim. I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
One, and this may be a report we need to look at more together. Do we have any areas where we're anticipating we were running against a deadline? I don't want to run up into a couple weeks before, but are we having issues with timelines?
From like a construction completion or?
Correct.
You know, we monitor budgets all the time. There's not a specific project that sticks out that we're having a timeline issue. You know, one thing that we do have to consider in the delivery of all these projects is, for example, a heating and air conditioning project needs to be considered seasonally. So if we're going to continue to provide air conditioning in the summer, we need to make sure that project doesn't decommission the air conditioning in the summer. So those are considerations we make. We are also cognizant of the overall bond timeline, which Taylor mentioned, and I'll mention a little bit here in a minute.
And then this may be for another discussion, but I question what our process looks like for analysis after this bond program wraps, to look and see what the community benefit was for economic development and how the contracts landed as far as whether it was local, what was the benefit to minority and women-owned businesses, for example.
That's a great question. We are doing a lot better at collecting the information about delivery to minority women-owned businesses and local contractors. That's information that we've started collecting more intentionally over the last several years, especially with the ABI policy. And so I will be able to perform that analysis easier.
And that'll be
Also-
important to
I'm
building
sorry.
trust and future bond programs.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, Ms. Ronnie, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but we're also doing a much better job through the procurement process.
Yep.
Of, I won't say require, but definitely strongly encouraging that there be a certain level of minority participation, particularly since, you all adopted the business inclusion program, but we were doing it before, but having that policy truly helps us keep our attorney happy.
Which, by the way, could not have been formulated until we retained a consultant to gather the data so that we could support policy.
That is correct.
Just want to
You have to
say,
have the
Yeah.
disparity study in order for us to
And
do
actually,
this.
that's the part of the reason for us being more intentional about data collection, is so that that's easier to collect and deliver next time we go through a study. Okay, so the next part of this presentation is.
Just a second,
Oh,
I'm sorry. I just had a couple quick questions. One that I'd follow along with, when a capital project that I haven't seen on this list and maybe on your list that couldn't fit. I'm curious if we could get a follow-up on what is happening with the Harrah's deck digital signage. I saw that the art got its digital signage. We talked about SoCon. It had been a goal to have that digital signage in place by SoCon for the last 3 years. And I'm just wondering if this has gotten dropped. We went through the easements with the county and we need it. I'm just curious if we could have follow-up. And then this is a broader question, and I'm not sure if I'm phrasing it properly, but so the bonds that we did in 2017 and we'll spend by the end of 2023, if I understand correctly, each of the investments has like a lifespan at which they mature and the debt has been covered, and we could effectively renew without raising the taxes. Is there a spreadsheet or a timeline, some kind of document that explains all of those investments and when they might amortize fully, or is that something we could get in the future as we look into more bonds?
Yeah, we do have that information. Our financial consultants that we work with on our CIP have that. That is long-term debt, so it's not going to be, none of that debt's going to be paid off in the short run, unfortunately. So there's not going to be capacity created from paying that debt off that then can be used for more debt without raising taxes around a GO bond in particular, so. Most of those are either 20 or 30-year bonds, so, yeah.
Well, and that's kind of what I'm getting at, because I want to better understand, I feel like historically this community isn't in an ongoing bond cycle like other cities, maybe because of our history of the Great Depression and so on. But I would like to better understand how often we would need to initiate bonds to create this cycle that then matures and funds itself over and over and over, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally makes
Okay.
sense. And you're right, a lot of other cities in North Carolina do have kind of a regular ongoing bond program. And those that have had them in place for a long time, 20 years or so, do have that capacity that you're talking about, so.
Well, and I would love to figure out where that sweet spot is for us, how many and when and what that looks like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
What's that?
But
No,
I
it's
guess
not
my
that long.
point is that if we took on new bonds every 4 to 8 years or something, at some point, we've got a whole cycle that's
Yeah,
renewing itself.
Yeah, some of the oldest ones will begin to roll off.
Right.
Yeah, so.
Ms. Turner, we took to Finance and HR, I think it was a year, maybe 60, it's time with COVID. We took that to the committee and recommended that we begin to look at this regular cycle and all the economic analysis that we would need to do in order to assess capacity. But again, coming from the city of Charlotte, I mean, it was about every 2 years that we would have a bond referendum. And so it's very important that we do come to a much more regular cycle, either 2 or 4 years with Charlotte. But making sure that we have that regular cycle, because where we're gonna go now, I think, is to need.
Yeah.
And so once we discuss the need, you will see that we truly need the financial resources in order to, I wouldn't even say keep pace. I would say we have a lot of catching up to do.
I agree,
Like
thank you.
this
Yeah.
facility we're in now.
Well, and because in part, we don't have this cycle in place
That's
already.
correct.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, that question is an excellent segue into the next section of this presentation. So if there's no further questions. Really, what we need to start doing is focusing on a 2 to 10 year outlook for our capital planning. And part of that focusing is trying to figure out what the funding strategy is so we can be on a regular bond cycle. And so we can initiate and program big projects, which you'll see a few here in a second. I will just to talk about the deadline again, and to also echo what Taylor was saying is just we have, so the bonds were approved on November 6, 2016. It gave us a 7-year window to complete the projects. That means that the bonds have to be issued by November 6, 2023. We need time between a project being awarded and encumbered and the issuance of bonds. And so what we have done for ourselves is to self-impose a deadline of next summer, May or June, in order for us to have projects awarded so that we can have time to provide the finance time to be able to issue those bonds. So really wanted to touch base on what that timeline is, and we are very aware of that and focused on that. We do have transportation projects. As we build new roads, sidewalks, and greenways, we have to maintain more roads, sidewalks, and greenways. Placemaking and complete streets is a big deal. One thing we're reviewing the budget and the scope right now is Livingston Street. That's a complete street project that we are trying to figure to ensure that the scope is appropriate and bring that back into the budget conversation. New sidewalks and greenways. ADA Accessible Improvements Council put in $150,000 a year starting this year to make ADA accessible improvements, and that project is underway to rebuild ramps at intersections throughout Asheville, and those are being assessed area by area, and so we can focus attention in the coming years on those. Parks renewals, you have playground, sports courts. We were very effective at taking care of some of those with the most recent bond, great use of that. And then building construction, we have an aging infrastructure, and that includes windows, doors, roofs, HVAC equipment. But we also have a need for improved efficiency, so and solar programs and modernization with regard to the energy use. And so those are things that are affecting our capital needs as well. Again, water, stormwater, fleet replacement, and also affordable housing are areas where we need to plan and program for the future. So I put this slide in here again to really emphasize that we have some large projects that have been assessed in the last few years and certainly need more discussion. These projects, like I said earlier, require a 5 to 10 year focus. We really, a lot of times municipalities look at the 2 to 5 year. I really think that in order for us to be successful in getting these programmed at the times that they're needed, we need to start taking a look at the 5 to 10 year. That's not to say that some of these won't fit into the next 5 years, but for all of them to work, we need to be having a longer term focus. You see projects that have recently had some news about them. Some of these, the operations facility is the relocation of Public Works on South Charlotte. There's operational needs there, as well as it was a site considered for affordable housing with the 2016 bond. Transit maintenance garage is limited in its capacity, and it also it's old as well, and there's not a lot of site storage. McCormick Field is definitely something we need to consider with regard to the maintenance of the facility, and then also expansion. West Asheville Public Safety Station, it's a combined use facility right now, which it does include recreational facilities as well. It's old. It's just old and in bad shape. So those are the considerations and the information that we're going to get out of the facilities condition assessment, which again will come to council here in the next few months. And so just to really summarize on that, again, we are focused on completing the bond work. We're 65% spent right now. I did the math today. We're at 75% timing, but we've got a plan to make sure we're on track. We're going to get there. Working to develop a better understanding of capital needs and prioritization and funding strategy. All of those work together to make sure that we can accomplish the small and the big things. And then capital needs are increasing due to additional services, aging infrastructure and facilities, and the effects of climate change and carbon reduction goals. Those are definitely elements that we all need to be considered in our capital programming. And then again, just to repeat, the future success of our capital program is dependent upon a consistent plan that considers the long view and avoids the frequent adjustments. So I'm going to take another pause.
Can we go to slide 41?
Yes, ma'am. There. Okay.
Maybe it's.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Didn't see the numbers.
I don't see how we do this without restructuring our hotel occupancy taxes. So I am again going to go ahead and refer to our legislative agenda and ask if we can get a legislative agenda on the governance committee agenda to revisit the reforming the local occupancy tax utilization. We're so far behind in our capital improvements projects that a meager 30-70 split isn't far enough, in my opinion.
The legislation is still pending in the legislature and will be considered. We're told this short session that it is likely to be considered. And I will say, I agree with you that 70-30 is not an appropriate split for this community. However, we were told in no uncertain terms that nothing different would be considered because it's actually 66-33 because the committee guidelines in the legislature, quote unquote, require, which don't actually require, the legislation to meet those guidelines. And so unfortunately, in terms of what the legislature is willing to do, that is what we were told would be the only thing that they would even consider. And that had to have support across the community from the TDA folks and the city and the county folks as well. Now, even if that legislation passes, it's got to come back to the county, I think. I'm not positive if it does or not, but I believe it does have to come back for consideration before the county commission. I do think a strong argument I do think there's a strong case that Asheville should not have to follow the committee guidelines created in the legislature because we just have a different situation. We have so many more visitors versus what other cities in North Carolina are seeing, and such an impact on our infrastructure and incredible high cost that comes with it. This capital projects list, I know staff put this slide together as a reminder of the large capital projects. Now we have many capital projects that are like roof replacements and sidewalk projects and road repaving and things like that. But I know they put this together as a reminder of some of those things that are floating out there. I would emphasize that this is not a slide that reflects what, council may be chomping at the bit to fund, but these are needs that are out there. Now, that second item, the operations campus, is talking about moving the facilities on South Charlotte Street to another location, which would be preferable, but obviously if it's cost prohibitive, we're going to have to examine whether that continues to be something we can immediately consider, or if we need to look at something else. McCormick Field has a $30 million ask to upfit, if you will, McCormick Field. Now, there's a pro ball team there that is capable of generating revenue. There's obviously going to be some other funding that plays into the needs for improvement to that field, not necessarily from the coffers of the city or the taxpayers of the city. the property taxpayers, I should say, of the city. So, to me, this is a reminder of what's kind of been simmering out there on this to-do list. There are a few things on here that kind of rise to the level of priority. The West Asheville Public Safety Facility, Fire Station number 8, there's some items on there that they're more in the necessity column rather than something that is tourism related or recreationally related or something like that. So I appreciate that you all put that on there as a conversation starter, if you will.
Yeah, exactly, Mayor, and I appreciate that, and it really just to start the conversation and create the context around the big ticket projects that we have, that we need to prioritize and have a little bit more discourse around.
Well, and most importantly, they're still our assets. A lot of those, I mean, we still own and operate and manage, and they're in need of repair.
Do we have a list of all the ways that we currently seek funding from the TDA around our shared needs? And can that be presented in some sort of report? What does it look like when we seek funding?
So,
That's probably not
there
a
was
you question, because I don't know that
yeah,
you've been in.
there was a I don't have that either. Okay. I mean, they went through a study a while back. But I don't
Yeah,
know.
there's
Right, we
there's
did.
actually a narrow window as to how we can utilize funding. You were saying the share, but there also, I believe a part of the legislation is how that funding can actually also be used, like for maintenance. I don't think that we can use the funding for
Right,
maintenance.
so the current legislation allows a 75-25 split. 25% of the room tax can be applied for by public entities and nonprofits for capital only, not for maintenance, not for operations. The legislation that is pending would change the mix to 66-33, again, only accessible by nonprofits and government entities, basically the cities and the county. I say cities because there are other municipalities in Buncombe County. To be used for capital maintenance and also some operational. In fact, for example, transit might be a qualifier. So it is a change. It is a positive change for the city. Again, to Councilman Roney's point, it is not enough of a change, but it is what is pending before the legislature. We just, before COVID, went through a collaborative process with the TDA. I say we, it was the city, the county, various entities participated in a
TMIP.
Yeah, the TMIP process to come up with a 10-year plans to try to figure out if we could get some consensus around some large projects to be funded over multiple years. One of the challenges with the room tax right now is that you can't debt finance anything. So they're having to just write a check 1 year for something and write a check. And that, if you're trying to do a big lift, like a Thomas Wolfe, just as an example, how do you debt finance using the room tax as a revenue stream? Other communities can do that. So my understanding is the legislation would also address that issue. Now, of course, COVID happened and everything got put on hold. And some of that money was used to help local businesses survive COVID, but there's still a significant amount of funding sitting there ready to be rebooted at this point. So I think, to your point, Councilwoman Roney, I think they may be looking for a new process. And in fact, the legislation, if it passes, and I think there's everyone's holding their breath to see if it does, sets up a similar but slightly different process for the application and creates a committee that will vet all of the applications and has designated spots on that committee that do a little bit of a better job reflecting the community in terms of the representation on that committee. So, maybe we need to spend some time at a future meeting kind of going over what that legislation looks like versus the current legislation. And the legislature goes into session in, I want to say April, I believe. I'm looking at Brad. I don't know if you know. Usually it's May, but I think now it's April.
Yeah, I think technically it's April. Obviously, they can be called back at any point, and the calendars have become a little more ad hoc.
Yeah, they're a little
in
right.
recent times, but
It's
April is the
not
plan.
predictable, yeah. But I will be working hard to try to get that conversation going again. And I know our TDA is actually at this point pretty anxious to see some movement on it as well.
Okay, so I'm very familiar with the limitations, and I do think we should revisit it. But I also think part of this report could be communicating in a public way, what are the updates to that process? When can we expect to see some results that are tangible in the community? And then with that, a conversation about, is this enough? Because we spend millions of dollars every year inviting literally everyone and their mother to come visit. Some people come with $700,000 to buy a house. Some people come with $700 to rent a hotel room. And some people are left with just $7 in a tent. And we invited everyone, so everyone is our responsibility. We are not getting enough of our TDA dollars to address the needs that we have. So we definitely need a report back, because this isn't just all of it. It says major facility needs, like this is urgent.
Yeah, and while we're being Debbie Downers here, wanted people to know that also a lot of the transportation projects that we've identified in the region, and you talked about sidewalks and some of our significant needs around some of our local roads that are being flooded, et cetera, are not currently being funded and being really kicked down the road because of the situation with the NCDOT. So some of our sidewalk projects, a lot of our roads that people are thinking that are going to be improved, we're having DOT doesn't have the funding for right now. So I'm concerned that there's going to be a real push that the city funds some of these things that that we were hoping and assuming that NCDOT would assist with, and I don't see that happening in my lifetime, frankly. So it's something that we really need to keep an eye on and communicate out to our residents that live here that are expecting these improvements a lot sooner than is actually on the calendar for the DOT.
Gosh, that's scary.
I just participated in a virtual conference on Friday with other local governments in North Carolina and folks that are working on this issue, because it is obviously affecting all cities across so there's a lot of emphasis on trying to address it, but I think you're right that it may be, it's going to be a big challenge to deal with.
I mean, right now, our divisions in Western North Carolina are double our allocated budget. So, right.
And they're,
And
the adjustments that they've made to their STIP has been pretty significant and pretty regular. We are still receiving MPO funding as that's a regular source of funds that we use. Additionally, there are the infrastructure funds but those funds are coming through existing programs, and so we'll see those kind of trickle in. It's not like the past infrastructure bills where they just kind of dumped a lot of money on communities or made a lot of money available. We'll see those over the period of 5 years, and so we're definitely keyed in on that. Again, it's the importance of us being able to identify those projects in that 5-year window, so we're prepared when those funding sources become available and being ready for that. And really using that as a guiding, not programming based upon that funding, but being secure in our ability program because that funding's available.
I just have a couple quick questions. When I'm looking at this spreadsheet, this list, the West Asheville Public Safety Facility, can you just clarify useful life? And this term means like fully depreciated, but not broken and falling apart, right?
No, it's still a functional facility. I would say that, in terms of assessing buildings, again, the facilities condition assessment study that we're doing, we'll take a look at the useful life of a facility, and typically without major renovations, it's about 50 years. And that building, if I'm not mistaken, is a 1950s building. It's got single pane windows and a lot of them. If I were to estimate, we probably got probably close to 1,000 square feet of single pane windows on both sides. And I think at the time, that was probably energy efficiency because you could open up everything and let the breeze blow through, but to modern day standards, it's not. And so definitely in order for us to improve the condition of that facility, if in fact we wanted to invest in that facility, it would be, improving windows, the air conditioning systems, certainly going through and just a total renovation.
I understand, thank you. A little bit to add to the tourism lodging tax discussion. My understanding is that there will be a TPDF allocation or application period in March or April for 10.4 million. And I'm not sure if we are, as a city staff, gathering and planning to make any asks, but some of these on the list come to mind. And then one more thing that's a follow-up request, the 105 million for the operations campus. I mean, I guess I was thinking this was our mulch and rock and garbage can collection facility, but so I'm a little unsure how it gets to 105 million. And I don't think I've ever seen that operations study. If I could have that sent to me or something, that would be helpful.
Yeah, and the next portion of this presentation is to talk about providing additional information to council and certainly how we communicate about these projects in more detail. And so definitely a need.
Great, and that one's just of particular interest to me because it's one of our large city-owned sites that is adjacent to one of our historic African-American neighborhoods, and it's like Charlotte Street destroyed the connection. I'm just wondering where in our long-term planning this one might fit into how we rebuild. Thank you.
The operation campus, I mean, look at that number. That is a big.
Right.
That relocation number is.
Yeah, that's why I requested it. Yeah, it's scary and unfortunate.
And there's also there's a timeline, and I just, for the benefit of the conversation, there's a timeline around these, which is buying property is first and foremost, and being able to budget for that, and then the design and the development of the site, and then this construction. So we're typically looking at, these costs being spread over time, but the need for us to program land purchase money in advance of actually budgeting for the construction of the facility. So those are the timelines that we will want to establish in looking at all of these major projects.
And Mayor, you might know the answer to this, but before urban renewal and the land was taken from South Charlotte Street, where was the service or operations before?
Darn, Maggie, you're the only one that's gonna know this. Before the Taj Mahal garage, I say affectionately. But that building was built what, in the, no, the current building was
looks a
what?
little 80s.
I'm gonna say 92, no, I don't, what was it?
96, I believe. It was previously housed in the White Labs building.
Oh.
And before that, it had the horses.
And by
right?
the way, is it really called Nasty Branch? Is that its official name? And if it's not, can we stop?
It was Town Branch, and then I think that there was a push to have it changed back to Nasty Branch, which it was previously.
That was its actual name, okay.
Well, then where
So
before
follow-
White Labs?
So following up on my colleague Councilwoman Turner's question about the additional funds available and repeating what I asked about what it looks like for the city to apply, when could we expect information on if and when we're applying for available funds? The
Are you
TDPF?
talking about the room tax?
TDPF.
So I just confirmed that they are opening, they're gonna open an application period this spring, and they think they'll have around $11 million total. Now, of course, that's for all qualified applicants. So the city will need to put together its asks around that funding. And again, they don't, since the new legislation is not in place, this is one-time funding, not, you can't debt finance with it.
And if I understand, the allocation would be this year, October or November, just for timeline.
And so the description, I believe, in the legislation requires that the projects be related to tourism, meaning while it's, obviously we will want to see these projects as something that locals can enjoy, they have to have the duplicate application. So in the past, we've been able to utilize the funds for things like Greenway projects and things like that. So I'll be interested to see what the management comes up with in terms of recommendations around this application window.
I'm sorry, but just one more question. So just to make sure I understand, if this is 10.4 from the previous year's tax, if there's an off chance that the legislation passes and we get this expanded capital definition, and that happens before this money drops, would this money be in the pot for a wider use, or is this, because it's last year, not going to be available to a possible new definition?
Yeah, I don't know
We
the
don't know.
answer to
Okay.
that.
I'm in the weeds.
Okay,
I
wait.
just want to know.
You're,
It's okay.
So I've got to look at the legislation, and Brad and I the effective date will tell us whether it's,
Okay.
I think it'll be for funds going forward, but we would need to check
Okay.
what the language is of the effective date of the legislation.
Ma'am, I have an idea that you should push funds a little bit.
Sir,
sorry.
we're in a work session right now, but if you could just wait till we're concluded, you'll feel free to ask a question.
Okay, so just a couple more slides here. So engagement planning, we understand and recognize that we need to complete the communication loop. The council needs to be informed, the public needs to be informed, and we need to be making sure that the message is consistent across all concerned. Engagement efforts, just to be clear, is that they're based upon community impact and project complexity. A new park, for instance, just as an example, is a complex project with heavy community involvement. A roof replacement at Public Works, which is actually one that's ongoing, is low impact, and the communications are limited to internal the audiences, stakeholders. There is a spectrum of engagement, and the following slides suggest the engagement which we are committed to make in a high complex project. So just to point out is that in a high complex project, these are the areas that we're going to have contact most often, sometimes it's more, with the community. We see planning efforts starting with actually CIP prioritization, the approval of a CIP every year to look at the 5-year plan, and then these engagement pieces throughout planning. And then at the time we move into design with the scope review and verification with the public, and then the 60 to 90, that's where it's more of a review of items. If we need to do any value engineering or something like that, that's certainly where we would want to take a project back to ensure that everybody's aware. And then construction review and scheduling is important for the community to know what's going on and when. And then construction updates throughout a project. As it was mentioned earlier, some of these projects are multi-year, and so being able to really keep the community up to date. And then also in operations, it's just then that becomes programming and facility maintenance needs as it moves forward. And that's more or less an operating engagement. So the way we currently oftentimes engage with council is at the time of award. When we're awarding construction agreements, we're awarding design agreements. A 5-year CIP is obviously in here. And oftentimes these items go on a consent agenda and they're approved without a lot of discussion. And so we feel like that's an opportunity that we're missing in order to be able to communicate in a broader way, in a more detailed way. We do bring back change orders if, in fact, we exceed a contingency. And then also groundbreaking, ribbon cuttings, those things that are standard for complex projects. And then again, the operational and the budget funding discussions that we are having today are examples of council engagement. So what we're proposing is that we connect the two, and that the highlighted items here, I hope that's showing up, represent places where we can actually take information that's collected from public engagement and bring it to council in a more intentional and informative way. Talking about project identification, visioning efforts, bringing studies back, those reports that we just went over, that we talked at length about, providing you with a more detailed explanation of what those, how those are incorporated in the CIP, what the funding expectations and the strategies are for those. Bringing back engagement to, we go out to the public in all three of these stages and collect information and verify the information with the public, bringing that back to council in a presentation, in a report, or a new business item. There are various ways that we can do this and certainly be more intentional about communicating that. So that's, again, the commitment that we're making in this case. 30% design review. That's when 30% for us is the point where you can make changes with the minimal cost. Once you get past 30% design, changes start becoming more expensive. And so that we need to try to convey and have a public discussion about the projects as early as we can in the process. And then also to review construction scheduling impacts with council so you're informed about what's going on in the field when a project starts. Again, not much changes in the project construction and certainly in the operations it's still budgeting, but really what we want to focus on is connecting the public, staff, and council in the prioritization, planning, and design efforts associated with these projects. And again, just to restate, is that some projects, a roof replacement project, is probably not going to take that level of engagement. But if there is a complex project and council wants to hear about it, and we certainly want to share that information, and so that's the commitment we're making for the future. And just to recap, is that capital planning and project execution needs more attention. We all need to be able to provide more discussion about these projects, these really important projects. Large, high-value projects need additional detail sharing as well. The communications loop we need to complete that. And then engagement will be applied with the understanding that engagement differs based upon scope and schedule, but we are committed to actually going the extra step to make sure that everybody's informed. With that, close, and if there's any questions about that, otherwise I'm going to hand it back over to Taylor.
So Jade, I appreciate the, more information and impact and communication with council earlier in the stage, because I think we've had some issues around that recently. But how do you, just from a process perspective, I mean, are you envisioning like a vote on the vision? But then, I mean, I think, but you're going to want nods from city council saying, yeah, we think you should go ahead with this. I mean, I'm just trying to sort of, because really, we tend to vote on monies. And so my question, because I also don't want staff to have an expectation that council won't come in later and change their mind. I mean, maybe there's different council members, there's, so can you kind of walk through what you've thought about that issue?
Yes, ma'am. It's a work in progress, but I would envision us doing a lot more information sharing and presentations. So the manager's report, we would take, as a matter of fact, one of the things that I had communicated before the meeting was that I think April represents a good time for us to bring a bond sidewalk update. If you look at the projects we still need to deliver in the bond, it's the sidewalks. And oddly enough, they have been the most difficult to advance because of DOT and various other right-of-way acquisition and that sort of thing. But I would envision us bringing you information about those projects and saying, here's the status update on these projects. There are various stories about the projects. We have one in West Asheville. It's got its own unique set of information we need to share. There's one in the Shiloh neighborhood that we've got some information to share on that. And so definitely providing you with the information that you need in case you're asked. So that would be one way of doing that. The other thing that I would envision is that we would use potentially new business items at the time of a contract award. If there's a level of sensitivity that are in a project that we feel like we need to actually convey additional information, rather than put that on consent and expect council to bring it off, is for us to put that on a new business item, provide a 2 or 3 minute explanation of the project, and then get the award based upon that additional information.
That sounds good.
I think first and foremost, council, we want to make sure that early on when we launch projects, particularly those that are, Jay, what did you call them, significant, or whatever, that terminology you used, we want to make sure that we are conveying not just here's the project, but what issues or concerns we've heard from the community that we want to make you aware of early on in the process, so that when we come back at, say, 60%, we can say, remember, we talked about these issues, here's how we are addressing those issues. And then when we get to 90, we're hoping, because we would have gone back out to the community and said, here's how we're, so it's this iterative process between the community and council, and enhancing that level of communication, so that when we get to 90% of design, when, as Jade said, it is really expensive, potentially, for us to redirect, that we will have hopefully resolved most of those issues. And yes, I know neighborhoods change in terms of composition and participation, and also council changes, but hopefully we will have addressed the major issues and hopefully minimize the cost impact.
Yes, ma'am. And some reassurances that this is an organizational effort. It's not a capital projects effort. We understand that other groups are out there communicating with the community, and that they're gathering information, and that they have information to share. And so this has been put together based upon an organizational conversation.
And yeah, and essentially what he is saying is we're making changes, not only communication with council and the public, but communication internally with our own departments, and bringing lots of departments to the table sooner, and to actually help us scope the project.
Yes, ma'am. Yep.
So I'll go ahead and say I'm particularly pleased with this change, especially in light of Memorial Stadium and the hours upon hours I've had to spend to unpack and learn the true story behind issues at hand. So I appreciate that.
Yes,
Thank
ma'am.
you.
Yep.
I just have one last broad question. I believe it's going to be for Tony. I meant to ask this earlier. General fund balance and this policy goal of 15%. In light of COVID and everything that has happened, and the risk that we may face, and knowing that another rescue plan may never happen if there's another pandemic, is there any advice, maybe from the League of Municipalities or anything, around adjusting this policy goal percentage, or is 15 still status quo okay?
No, we haven't heard anything from the league, but to your point, I mean, I think it definitely is something to consider, because I think even before the pandemic, when we would go out and do debt issuances and we'd talk to the rating agencies, they really talked to us and wanted to see our fund balance closer to 20% even then. So definitely, as times have gotten more turbulent, I think it's certainly beneficial to have a higher fund balance, or the highest that the council is comfortable having, so.
I guess, and so let me just understand if I get this right. So if we didn't have rescue plan money, and we gave 1.6 million to the parking fund because of its shortages during the pandemic, aside from having that money in that pot to choose from, in the future, what would we do? We'd pull it from our general fund balance, right?
We would most likely have to,
That'd be our only
yes.
option, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, and I think that's a good point, because we have adopted a policy as a city to maintain a fund balance of 15%, but there are many cities that maintain a much higher fund balance than we do. And I don't have a feel, honestly, whether we're in line with a city our size, with the level of with our general fund size, with our expenditures. I assume across the nation, it also depends heavily on what your revenue source is and how stable that is. We tend to have a pretty stable revenue source, good times, bad times. It ebbs and flows to some degree, but we haven't seen huge swings. So, but I would be interested to kind of do some benchmarking and see if 15% is really, not necessarily whether or not we need to change the policy, although maybe that'd be a consideration, but just, to your point about what would really be the strongest fund balance for us to be maintaining.
As we move through the budget work session, could we also look, since we're going to take this capital improvement project focus this year, and just look at our stated climate emergency, the climate justice initiative we asked community members to participate in, and maybe also look at like, not just facilities that are getting older and needing maintenance, but also how stormwater mitigation, for example, is going to affect our facilities. It might look like community gardens in partnership, but maybe also look at that as an urgent need as well.
Sure. And I'll ask Jane.
I just add that we are looking at our resilience plan that was done, and it does deal with a lot of stormwater mitigation and those types of issues. And so it's under review with staff right now.
Great, thank you.
And that's really the reason why we have expanded the scope of the discussion around our capital projects, that we need input and information from a lot of different perspectives.
Oh, you wrapping us up?
Yeah, all we have left is the, just coming back to the timeline, and the next time we'll touch base will be at the council retreat where we'll have some more detailed financial information to share. That's it.
Thank you, everyone. Great presentation.
Okay, so the next time we're going to be talking about all of this is at the council retreat. And we're going to have a council meeting in about 47 minutes, something like that. So see you all back here in just a minute.
Thank you all. I know this was a lot of information to get through, but appreciate your patience.
Do you want us to exit these sessions? Maggie?